to say that I was part of Occupy LA. I was not down there the night that it happened, the raid. I watched it on live stream, and it was really horrific because when you think about 3 months prior, Antonio Villaraigosa, the Democratic mayor of Los Angeles, who started out as a community organizer, actually came out to the occupiers with ponchos when it was raining. And Eric Garcetti, sitting councilman, who is our current mayor, basically said, let them stay as long as they want. It was amazing what happened in the 3 months. And everybody knows that after a conference call with 28 mostly Democratic mayors and Homeland Security, those Occupy camps were cleaned out very quickly. And it was pretty horrific because I witnessed middle-class kids who had never had any brushes with the law, and basically up until that point I think saw policemen as their friends, have the experience of what it was like to be a resident of the inner city and see the cops as not your protector but as your enemy, basically. Mm-hmm. And I had a very similar feeling while I was watching what happened at the Nevada State Convention when Roberta Lang brought in that phalanx of Las Vegas state troopers to line the stage to present like a guard against the Bernie people, as if they would do anything violent. And then, of course, the mainstream, well, the Democratic Party narrative, the state party narrative, echoed by Debbie Wasserman Schultz of the National Party, echoed by every single mainstream media, who were not even in the room, by the way, that the Bernie supporters were violent, that they were throwing chairs, that they stormed the stage. I mean, it was really horrific, the narrative that came, and I felt that it was very, very similar to what I had witnessed in Occupy. And I think a lot of these people, especially young people, who got involved with the political process for the first time in their lives because of Bernie, and because he spoke to things that no other politician spoke to, really began to see the system for what it was, and really felt, you know, victimized by the system that they had trusted up until this point. And it was really kind of watching a life lesson unfold before my very eyes. And at one point I choked up because one young girl whose stream I was watching, I heard her cry out, "Bernie, help us!" It was just this spontaneous utterance that she could not believe what was happening in her own party, in her own city. And it was just very moving to me. And I'm worried that if they try to do something like that in Philly, that we might end up having a repeat of Chicago in 1968, whereas, you know, the Chicago PD actually instigated the riots. The protesters were very peaceful, and it was the police that instigated the riots. So I'm really hoping that that won't happen again.
Yeah, me too. I mean, there were, not just in Chicago, many places in the 60s where there were riots and shootings where all the time the narrative was, oh, but it's the rioters that are the problem. Well, in many cases, the rioters are peaceful protesters who are being violently handled by the police, and then they very instinctively and naturally resist to protect themselves. But so you are talking about, you are nervous that both the same narrative can happen at the National Convention, but also you're nervous that Bernie might get behind Hillary Clinton. Now, I remember back in July when I started helping out with the Bernie campaign in the ways that I could, I remember Bernie was interviewed, and he was asked flat out, are you going to run as a third-party candidate? And he said, no, I'm not. I will not do anything that risks a Republican entering the White House. So why would it be surprising if Bernie, in spite of everything that's happened in the primary, I'm not lying to that in any way, but why would it be surprising if he got behind Hillary? Because he quite clearly have stated that he will do anything he can to prevent a Republican from gaining the White House.
Well, if he wants to prevent a Republican from getting into the White House, then he better run as a third party. And let me give you some perspective on that.
Very well put. Very well put.
When I met Bernie for the first time in April of 2011 at a fundraiser for his Senate re-election campaign, after I heard him speak during the Q&A session, I said, "Would you please challenge Obama in the 2012 primary?" And I'll never forget how he answered. He said, "No." He just did not want to be president. That was not his thing. He was not ambitious like Hillary. He didn't think he was entitled to it. He just was doing his good work in the Senate. So when I met him the next time in October of 2014 at a fundraiser for the Richmond Progressive Alliance, the group of people who took on the Chevron candidates for the city council in Richmond, which is a town dominated by Chevron refinery, they actually won, even though they were outspent 20-1, and Bernie was there to help them. I met him at that, and in that, I knew I'd only have a couple moments with him, and the first thing I asked him to do was make a short video, which he ended up doing in 10 seconds, asking the people of California to support a ban on fracking. And then the second thing I asked him to do was to consider running as an independent so that he could lead a movement and not just an electoral campaign. So when he decided in April to run as a Democrat, I totally understood his strategic reasons, and I came to see that he was able to lead a movement within the Democratic Party, or I should say from the Democratic Party. But I was pushing back against my friend Kevin Zeese, who's a very good friend of mine. He was part of Occupy Washington, D.C. He and his partner Margaret Flowers lead popularresistance.org, and he actually was Ralph Nader's press secretary during one of his runs. He and some of the members of the left, Ashley Smith, for instance, in the Socialist Party in Vermont, used to derisively call Bernie a sheep herder, you know, that he was sheep herding people into the Democratic Party only to ask them to vote for Hillary. And I used to say back to them in those days, well, that's fine. That doesn't mean that the rest of us have to endorse Hillary. If Bernie doesn't make it, I'm going to vote for Jill Stein in 2016, just like I did in 2012. Now, what's really interesting is over the course of this, I think Bernie has seen how much he's been burned by the party, but he is still not ready to go third party. And that is because he unfairly and incorrectly blames Ralph Nader for Al Gore's loss. And Kevin wrote an amazing article on that, which if you need links somewhere, I can get it to you, basically disproving that. There were a lot of reasons for Gore's loss. I'm not going to get into the whole meat of his article, but the fact of the matter is Bernie actually really believes that Gore was responsible, or he knows that that Nader is responsible, or he can see that Nader is universally blamed, and he doesn't want his legacy to be another Nader. But what Bernie doesn't understand, and what what Kevin and Patrick Murphy just wrote in an article that was published today in Salon.com, is that 2016 is very different from 2000. The vast majority, well, I should say the plurality of Americans do not identify with either the Democrat or the Republican Party. One poll shows that 43% identify as independents, and another poll shows that 50%. So the Democrats and the Republicans each have less than 30% of people identifying with them. And Bernie, as you've seen, has gotten the lion's share of the independents. If he wins in California on Tuesday, it will be because of the no-party preference voters. Even if we have so many obstacles for them to vote, it's not even funny, the machinations that we're going through to let the NPP people know what they have to do to vote for Bernie on Tuesday. But if they do come out, and if the youth comes out, which, by the way, youth prefer Bernie anywhere from 70 to 90%, but only 20% of them have been voting. If we can get the youth to come out in California, and Bernie wins 67%, he can win the nomination outright. But if not, you know, it becomes a contested convention. And then the question is, what does Bernie do? Does he...
But the more interesting question is, what do we do after a contested convention? Whether or not Bernie wins, like we all saw in '08 this handsome, charismatic guy who were talking up a storm and who wanted to do good. I still believe that to this day. And he was elected in. And I believe that to a great extent the machine took over. And so whether or not Hillary or Bernie gets into the White House, what do? We can't go back home as we did after '08. We can't go back home. We can't sit back down on the couch and think, oh, Bernie got this. He has been saying from day one, we need to have his back all the way through. So no matter who wins, what, in your opinion, is the way forward?
Well, I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing before his campaign, which is organizing on the issues. I really feel that we can get a lot done. I mean, I personally worked with the Republican mayor of Beverly Hills to get Beverly Hills to be the first city in California to ban fracking. I worked with a coalition of people in California to stop a very bad bill that would have nipped community choice energy systems in the bud. We stopped that. A protest that I did actually led to stopping the sale of the LA Times to the Koch brothers. So I can point to some successes in my activism, either individually or in coalitions, and that's what I'm going to go back to doing. Now, the question is, I was starting to say that if at the convention, this is the interesting question to me, and one that I want to explore with my fellow delegates. Are we going to follow Bernie's lead if he wants to pretend that if he can't get the superdelegates to switch, and he wants to try to get some concessions in the platform, which we all know isn't even worth the paper it's printed on, do we go along with him and basically act like we're achieving victory and then vote for Hillary, or do we rebel even within, at the convention? It's an interesting question. I'm certainly not going to be leading the way. I'm at the point right now where I just want to find out what's in other people's minds. But I think that Bernie did start a political revolution. He has said it's us, not him. And this revolution has a mind of its own. So now, after the convention, we already have 3 different groups. We have brand new Congress, which is started by a former Bernie staffer and some organizers, one of whom is one of my people I mentored here in Los Angeles. And they're trying to get progressives into the Congress in 2018. So that's one avenue. Then you have the People's Summit, which is happening in Chicago the 3rd week in June, and that's started by People for Bernie and Progressive Democrats of America and some other nonprofits. Then you have a group called politicalrevolution.org, which is started by 2 individuals who split off of People for Bernie, and they're actually having a convening in Philadelphia the Saturday before the convention starts, in which right now they have a working group that's writing a people's platform, and they're going to be talking about the way forward. So what I'm noticing is, and then of course last month in May, apparently Ralph Nader had a bunch of activists and left-wing groups meeting in D.C. So what I'm noticing is what I've been noticing my whole life is the fragmentation of the left. There's very little unity. I remember when I met Kevin the first time at Occupy Washington, D.C., it was the same weekend that the Campaign for America's Future had a conference, and Van Jones had just been unceremoniously thrown under the bus by Obama and kicked out of his position as energy czar because he supported Jeremiah Wright. He had started a group called Rebuild the Dream, and something that he said to me and said to the audience really resonated with me. He said the left is always in its silos. There's the environmentalists, there's the women's reproductive rights, there's the racial justice, there's the workers, and the problem is we don't come together. And he pointed out that in D.C. every Tuesday morning Grover Norquist has a meeting, and he's the famous guy that got all the Republicans to pledge not to ever vote for a tax increase. And he is able to get the gun rights people and the pro-life people and all these different groups together to sublimate their own issues in favor of supporting each other. And I have long wished that the left would do this, but I don't really see any chance of it. So I'm just going to keep on doing what I do and try to get some of the Bernie supporters. We have 1,800 people in our database. My goal is to try to get them to start lobbying Feinstein and Boxer to support some of Bernie's bills. I mean, everything in Bernie's platform, he actually has, as a senator, a bill to accomplish. And there's no reason these liberal senators shouldn't be co-sponsors.
But instead of, as you say, doing your own thing and waiting for the others to get out of the weeds, so to speak, and actually start working together. Wouldn't the ideal be to actually try and make an umbrella organization?
Well, it would be, but you know, it's really interesting. I did that with getting money out of politics. The second month of Occupy, I got together a dinner in Santa Monica with Cenk Uygur, who has his group Wolfpack, who thinks that the way to get money out of politics is to have it start from state legislatures. Like if 3/5 of the state legislatures vote to overturn Citizens United, they can. And then there was Angelique Kronheim, who was with Common Cause. They had a different way of doing it. David DeGraw from Occupy Wall Street, Mary Beth Fielder from Move to Amend, and Dylan Ratigan, who was on CNBC at the time, and he was railing against money in politics. And I had a dinner of all these people together, and I said, already there's like 6 different amendments to get money out of politics. Don't you think, and several different approaches, don't you think we should all work together in a line? And Dylan Ratigan said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, I believe in the modern theory of insurgency. And I looked that up. That's not actually a thing. Maybe he just made it up. But he said the modern theory of insurgency, if enough people are working on the same thing, even if it's from different angles, it will eventually become the zeitgeist. Now, I don't know if, and the way forward will become clear. So, you know, I kind of relaxed a little bit when I heard that, because I ended up seeing that it came true with Occupy. I mean, prior to Occupy, the national conversation was about the phony issue of the deficit. And if you remember correctly, Obama, who I have a more dark view of than you, but we don't need to get into that, he assembled the Simpson Bowles Commission, which was to look at reforming Social Security. And we all know what that means. So Alan Simpson was a crazy right-wing senator, and Erskine Bowles was a Democratic Leadership Council centrist out of the Clinton White House. And they were being advised by the Pedersen Foundation. And Pete Pedersen has been working for 30 years. He started the Blackstone Group to eliminate Social Security, forgetting about reforming it. He wants to see it eliminated. He wants to see seniors going back to eating cat food because they can't afford, you know, food. And this commission got the name the Cat Food Commission because they were about ready to adopt these recommendations. And what the recommendations were was to take the cost of living and index it to the chain CPI, which sounds very wonkish, but it would have been, in effect, a cut to senior citizens every month. So Obama would have been the first Democratic president to put this on the table. Then the Occupy movement came around. It changed the conversation from the phony issue of the deficit to the real issue of income inequality. Fast forward 4 years later, and yesterday, what does Obama do? Obama proposes increases in Social Security.
Yeah, we actually, if you go to The Intercept, there's an article on Obama's change in stance on Social Security, although he puts more credit on the lobby groups and Bernie Sanders leading a charge of senators to oppose it. But as Bernie Sanders himself has said, many of the things that he's been able to do lately has been in the wake of the Occupy movement because of the change in status quo that the Occupy movement and to an extent the Tea Party movement made in the civil society of America. Lauren Steiner, I want to thank you very much for the ample time you've given us and for the insight into both history and present of the elections and politics in America. I hope you'll consider coming back on the show sometime.
Thank you very much. I'd love to. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So everyone, that was Lauren Steiner, and that concludes our roundup of California primary news and election news in general.